is a vote for Team Green a vote for Trump? Let's be clear about this, okay? The numbers that you just read, what do they actually mean? They actually mean that the Democratic Party has already lost the November election. They have no path of victory. If you sign your name next to Team Blue in November, just know that you are writing on the lauch that you have co signed for the Democratic genocide, that you are cool with 200,000 plus of your brothers and sisters in humanity, your brothers and sisters in Islam and in Christianity, because there are many Palestinian Christians. You are okay with them being genocided by your regime. Fear your Lord.
Dr. Jill Stein,
Yes,
a white Jewish woman,
yes,
and yourself,
yes.
a black Muslim,
Very black and very Muslim. Yes.
on the same ticket.
Yes.
The whole world is witnessing a genocide in real time. Images of innocent men, women, and children being torn apart cycles on our social media every day. While many American politicians choose to ignore, deny, or even support the murderous regime of Israel, there are a few voices in the politisphere who have loudly denounced this genocide and called for an arms embargo on Israel to stop the killings.
Mhm.
With me today is one such voice. Dr. Bilal, or Butch Ware, is an activist and professor of Islamic Studies, West Africa, African American Studies, and History at the University of California, Santa Barbara. A few weeks ago, he added another title, that of the Green Party Vice Presidential nominee and running mate to Dr. Jill Stein. Professor Ware, Assalamu alaikum and welcome to American Muslim Dialogue.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. It's really good to be here with you.
Alhamdulillah. Let's get into it. So, you're making history as being the first African American Muslim on a major presidential ticket. So, can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing and what formed your thoughts and what affects your worldview today?
Yeah. I think that the short version of this story would be to say, I was born in Washington, D.C., 1973, and I was raised, in pretty extreme poverty in a time when, D.C. was still recovering from like 68 riots. You're in the middle of white flight. So I actually never lived at the same street address for a calendar year until I was, I think, 8 years old. It was, evictions, moving from place to place. I grew up in real serious poverty. My mother actually was told by her high school guidance counselor at age 15 when she was pregnant with me that she should abort the baby. My mother is a, white woman, my father African American, and she was told by her white guidance counselor that she would be strung out on heroin and prostituting herself within 2 years if she had me.
Yeah.
So they tried to keep me from even being born. Moved to South Minneapolis as a young person, grew up there. And I think that with respect to what shaped my worldview, in addition to kind of having an opportunity to look at America from a number of different angles, in a community that had a lot of indigenous people, a lot of Asian Americans. This is in the south side of Minneapolis in the 1980s. When I was 15 years old, I read the autobiography of Malcolm X. And that, I think, was the beginning of the shaping of the person that you see in front of you more than anything else. I read that book cover to cover in one night. And I went to my school library and I checked out English translation of the Quran because I wanted what Malcolm had at the end of that book.
Mhm.
And I think that what spoke to me in that book was that Malcolm was honest about how dark some of the places that he had been in actually were. And I had seen some dark places. And I still think that that book, the autobiography of Malcolm X, is probably the most powerful narrative that we have of spiritual redemption that's written in the English language. So, literally within a week of that reading of the autobiography of Malcolm X and then the Quran, I read that cover to cover the next night. I took my Shahada within a week. And that was also the beginning of like learning about Africa, really kind of becoming politically aware. Malcolm both brought me to my, to my dean, but also kind of taught me the importance of Africa, the importance of knowledge of self, the importance of being politically engaged. And in many ways, I feel like this vice presidential run now is the fruition of things that Malcolm didn't get to see with his life, but that his words and his heart and his hands, the work of his hands, like shaped, like we are farming, in a field that Malcolm cleared for us. So I think that that's probably the short way I would answer that question. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So, as far as the Green Party, what informed your decision to join the Green Party? How has your values as a Muslim American,
Yep.
as an African American, as an
Yep.
activist informed your decision to join as a vice president?
So this was another part of the story where I realized that, like, God has a plan the whole way and you might not understand it, but it's there. So I mentioned moving from DC to south side of Minneapolis. I was coming from a city that was 95% black to one that was about 20% black, maybe 10% indigenous, good number of Asians, and a lot of working class white folks. And my best friend, still my best friend to this day, that I made in that neighborhood in South Minneapolis, is a guy named Sean Young. Now, Sean's mom, Annie Young, part indigenous, part Euro American, was actually the first ever elected Green Party official in the state of Minnesota. She served on the Parks and Recreation Board from the 90s into the 20 teens. And she was the only politician I knew. um, so I actually knew a lot about Green Party values because two single moms, Sean's mom and my mom, essentially shared more or less a co-parenting relationship. We were always over at Sean's house or vice versa. So I didn't need to be introduced to the Green Party's values when I was brought onto the ticket. I literally learned them like around Annie Young's, kitchen table when I was a kid. And the way that I would summarize what I kind of learned was that Green Party doesn't have politicians. Green Party has public servants, people who see themselves as like doing the public's business on behalf of the public. And I think the current American political environment desperately needs an infusion of public servants that are interested in doing the public's business and being representatives of the people. Because that's what I saw. Annie was on the park and rec board and was trying to make sure that there were safe places for the kids in our neighborhood to play. She would go into city council meetings, cantankerous and argumentative. We're ready to like get the people's business done. And so yeah, so fast forward when I was invited onto the ticket by Dr. Jill, and actually at the nomination convention, my friend Sean drove down from Minneapolis to Chicago for this. And when Dr. Jill met Sean Young, she looked at me. She said, "Wait, Annie Young is your mom?" And he said, "Yeah." And she said, "When I joined the Green Party, Annie Young was one of my mentors. She was one of the people
Wow.
that taught me Green Party history and like kind of read me in on Green Party values." And I was like, "Man, like." There is no wasted motion in God's plan for sure. Like it is all written and it is all beautiful and it is all
Amazing. Wow.
yeah, this like symphony orchestra. And yeah, with notes that might be unexpected, but they fall right on time and in perfect harmony. And that's the last thing that I'll say is that I think that Muslims really need to take a careful look at the Green Party platform because the kind of three-word that the kind of triumvirate, the three words that you'll find at the bottom of a lot of Green Party posters and flyers are people, planet, peace.
Yes.
And the basic vision of the Green Party concords perfectly with Islamic values. The Green Party sees themselves as stewards, right, of the people, of the planet, of the peace. Not dominion, like that you own it and that you get to decide what to do with it, but that it is on loan and that you are going to be called to account for the way that you served as a custodian of these three precious things, the people, keeping people safe from harm, nonviolence approach to everything except, when it's absolutely necessary. Always trying to make sure that the rights of all individuals are respected, right? That you take care of the people, you keep the people from reaching harm, and you give the people their voice. Abolish the electoral college, ranked choice voting, like all the things that you can do to allow people to have a say in their decision making. The planet, I think that this is probably what the Green Party is most known for, right? Is the ecological, preservation values. But this too used to be what Muslims were about until they started taking all of their, talking points from Gulf oil barons, frankly, who don't seem to really care at all that Muslims are going to be called to account for the way that we steward the environment and how we serve as custodians over this shared home, this precious earth from which we as human beings are formed. Like we're made from the earth and the water, and being stewards of the people is being stewards of the earth and the water, and being stewards of the planet is being stewards of the earth and the water. And we are, woefully inadequate in our current state of custodianship over both of these things. And then lastly, of course, the peace,
Mhm.
right? And what is Islam if not peace? And what we have right now instead is people who are warmongers and war profiteers. Both Team Red and Team Blue, are wholly owned subsidiaries of APAC and the weapons manufacturers. And so none of these people want peace. They want forever war. They want the extraction that is facilitated by political violence and imperialism in every corner of the globe. We just passed 9/11 memorial, right? They want forever wars where hundreds of thousands of people, especially but not exclusively in the Middle East and in Africa and in Latin America, will suffer violence in order to make commodities a little cheaper to extract from those places. So we desperately need custodians of the people, the planet, and the peace. And I think that the Green Party is by far the best path forward for those things for Americans.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, Dr. Jill Stein and yourself are polling very high in the Muslim community and with other people who have decided to sit out the election.
Yeah.
And according to a new poll from the Muslim American Political Survey from the Yaqeen Institute
Yeah.
about to be published,
Oh, wow.
they
Give
polled.
me some fresh numbers I
Yeah, I'm
haven't
going to
seen
give you
yet. Come
some
on,
new
lay it on me,
ones. They
sis.
polled they polled the population of American Muslims not just in the swing states,
Yep. Yep.
but more broadly, and they found that if the election were held today, the third party, which in this
Yep.
case would be your party, the Green Party, would win about 53% of the vote
Allahu Akbar.
versus 15% and 4% for the Harris and Trump tickets respectively.
Yeah.
And you probably heard about the new CARE
SubhanAllah.
poll that shows you and Dr. Stein are leading in the swing states among Muslims in Arizona, Michigan,
Yeah.
and Wisconsin by
And
at
I think
least 5 points.
that probably this Yakin poll is going to supersede that. I mean, what we've seen just in the last week has been an absolute groundswell of support. I think that the polls are going to continue to change on a day by day, week by week basis because we're starting to see consolidation of support across Muslim communities and not just across Muslim communities, right? A
Right.
lot of communities that have like personal investments, communal investments in the anti-imperialist, stance, especially on Gaza. But I
Yeah.
mean, Gaza is just a microcosm of the broader problem that is American empire. I mean, everybody likes to pin the genocide in Gaza on the Zionist entity, but that is our genocide. It stops with a single phone call from the U.S. president, which means that we own it, lock, stock, and two smoking barrels. So there's a lot of people that are going to be following in the Muslims' footsteps. They're going to be abandoning Team Blue and Team Red and getting with Team Green. And by the way, you're starting to see specifically the Democrats becoming very, very nervous about this because you've seen attacks from AOC. You saw how when we did the Breakfast Club, they sent in, a paid hit woman, a Democratic surrogate to
Mhm.
try to slow the momentum. I mean, that ended up backfiring, but
Mhm.
Team Blue is getting very, very concerned about this green wave that you just cited.
And speaking of AOC and others who are criticizing Dr. Jill Stein and yourself as predatory with no plans of winning elections, what do you say to the Muslim voter who is always told to vote, 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 and make sure your voice is counted, especially in this critical time? Do we want to risk handing over the country to another Trump presidency? And what would happen under a Trump presidency?
Yeah, excellent. So this is a really, really crucial set of questions. I want to go back first to the AOC question. Let's call her by her name, her moniker that I've given her, AOC Pelosi. Okay, because that woman, like set, like Jesse Owens, Usain Bolt type speed records for how fast she could sell out. She came in, running on this progressive platform, and in the last 2 years alone, has collected $18 million from the American people, and she is living high off the hog. So for her to talk about somebody being predatory, that's rich, in
Mhm.
both senses of the word, right? So yeah, we don't have to take seriously, this sellout, and the way that she would, evaluate the situation. With respect to the broader question of is a vote for Team Green a vote for Trump. Let's be clear about this, okay? The numbers that you just read, what do they actually mean? They actually mean that the Democratic Party has already lost the November election. They have no path of victory, zero. So when I joined the team, The first thing that I did, a meeting, one of the first things, meeting with Dalia Mugahed from Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, been polling the Muslim community for 10 years, not institutional capacity, but just a personal meeting to see what the situation was. And she explained to me that in Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Michigan, these three swing states that the Democrats absolutely need, that in 2020, that Biden got 65% of the vote. And then in January 2024, he was polling at 12%. Those numbers are getting worse, not better. The third party is taking on and us because we're the only third party that can actually win this election mathematically. We are going to be an option for voters in 95% of the ballots in this country. More than enough electoral access to actually win. So to go back to the fundamental issue, is that the Democrats actually cannot win this election. It is mathematically impossible for them to do so. So the idea that you're giving the election to Trump by voting green, no, they have lost the Muslims. They're not getting the Muslims back. That ship has already sailed. And the Democratic Party may never recover from the beating that it's about to take in November.
Mhm.
Parties die. We used to have wigs in this country, right? We don't have wigs anymore because political parties, like people think we have a two-party system. That's not in the Constitution. That's an accident of history. And parties come into and out of existence. They change polarity. Democrats and Republicans used to be on opposite sides from where they are now with respect to racial politics in America and so forth. The Democratic Party, as currently constituted, is a dead man walking.
Mhm.
And I know that it's hard for people that have made long-term investments in that party to understand that, but they cannot win. And they had everything, just a couple of years ago, and they threw it all away by going completely corporate, selling out to AIPAC, selling out to the war machine, and making themselves completely indistinguishable from the militarized fascists on the extreme right. And they're going to pay the cost for that now. So then this becomes the question. What are you going to do with your vote? And Muslims, as you said, are already making that decision. They are going to invest in producing an actual third party alternative, right? In actually empowering the only group that doesn't stand for imperialism abroad and fascism at home. Because, by the way, while everyone is fear mongering and telling you that you have to vote blue, otherwise you're going to get fascism, the Democrats are the ones in democratic cities, in democratic states that have been sending cops to college campuses like mine, where they came in riot gear to remove a student encampment. That this Trump boogeyman is a fiction. Fascism is here now. We already live in an environment where people are afraid to speak out on Gaza because they're afraid to lose their job. We have university presidents being fired in McCarthy era style inquisition hearings, right? So the idea that, oh no, Trump, I'm sorry, you cannot win that argument with me because I see what the Democrats are doing. And by the way, let me just say this. Which camera are we going to use? I need to look directly into the camera for this one. Let's look directly into this camera. If you sign your name next to Team Blue in November, just know that you are writing on the law that you have co-signed for the Democratic genocide, that you are cool with 200,000 plus of your brothers and sisters in humanity, your brothers and sisters in Islam and in Christianity, because there are many Palestinian Christians. You are okay with them being genocided by your regime. Fear your Lord. How are you going to explain that vote on Judgment Day? How are you going to explain that vote when those 200,000 souls come to you saying, I have been treated unjustly. Lord, give me justice. This one aided my murderer. People think that this is just a political question. Before anything and everything else, I am a man of faith. Who will shield you from this choice, right? The people of Pharaoh didn't choose Pharaoh. They didn't vote for him, but when they stood next to him, they were washed away by a flood. What will be the fate of people who positively affirm that they choose genociders as their leaders?
So many Muslims in the political sphere, they often are working within the Democratic Party, trying to push for change,
Yeah.
trying to convince Harris to commit to no more arms to Israel, and that they feel that voting for the Green Party, it throws away your vote because Harris is going to win anyway, and we need somebody in office to stop this.
Yeah.
I'm sure you disagree with that. So I'd like to know more of what Dr. Jill Stein, and your
Yeah.
position and what you plan to do on day one to help with
Yeah.
stop the genocide.
So, I mean, the just to kind of go backwards and treat that question, even if you don't believe my political assessment that the Democrats are bound to lose, just know that they do. That's the reason why they are unleashing these attacks to try to silence the Green Party right now. Number two, if you actually believe that you could persuade Harris through some kind of moral persuasion, she's in a position to effect that change now. She is essentially the all but titular head of the Democratic Party at this point. If she were actually serious about a ceasefire or an arms embargo, then that's something that you could do now. And all that they're doing is what they've always done. They're telling you that they're going to do something when they have absolutely no intention of doing so. And they're happy to let little kids get blown up in tents every single night until they have what they want. Gaza completely destroyed and contracts given out to their favorite corporations. So that is what's happening if you are going to vote for Harris. And if you don't believe me, look at how they treated Palestinians at the DNC. They are slaughtering Palestinians like animals in Gaza, and they are muzzling them like animals when they try to speak. And I'm just going to say this: how long is a proud, like, strong, intelligent woman like Rashida Tlaib going to sit there while she's essentially horsewhipped in public by the Democratic Party?
That's true.
How long is Linda Sarsour going to stand there while the Democratic Party horsewhips them? How long is Ilhan Omar going to put up with this? How long is Yusuf Salam going to put up with this party that is committed to the utter destruction of Muslims? It's an untenable situation. As soon as the Green Party demonstrates sufficient strength, you are going to see those people fleeing from that party. And that will be the beginning of an exodus. Now, if we manage to land this Muhammad Ali like 1 in a million shot, you know, uh, take out the champ Sonny Liston moment. And by the way, I wouldn't have joined the ticket if I didn't think that winning was possible. I would not have done it. I know that it's a long shot. That was a long shot too. But Ali didn't get into the ring with Sonny Liston trying to be a spoiler or a protest vote. He got in the ring to knock that sucker out, and that's what we're getting in the ring to do. Also, like, I'm raised in the Black Muslim tradition, and that's what we're here to do. So let's say we land that punch and we end up, getting 34% of the popular vote across the country and therefore winning the electoral college. We're still going to have, an intransigent Congress. We're still going to have all of a Supreme Court that has been jerry-rigged by Team Red. There are going to be a lot of obstacles, but there's a lot of things that a president can do with executive power, including, just like Ronald Reagan did in the 1980s, just like Eisenhower did before him, making a phone call and telling the Israelis no. And Dr. Jill Stein has already been on record saying that if she becomes the president of the United States, the genocide ends on day one of her regime, because she calls and says this is an arms embargo. And every single Israeli anti-Zionist, Gideon Levy, Ilan Pappé, all of the people that have been voices in the wilderness in Israel, they all maintain that if the U.S. cuts off the military support, that's not just the end of the genocide. That is the end of the Zionist entity, right? That is the end of the apartheid state. Muslims have the capacity to end the Nakba if we would vote, if we would stand up, if we would provide a position of moral leadership that demonstrates to the rest of this American community that the Green Party can demonstrate power. Because as soon as they start to see us rising in the polls, as soon as polling starts to turn a place like DC green, a place like Michigan green, potentially Pennsylvania and or Georgia green, then a bunch of people are going to follow the Muslims lead, especially young people that are against the genocide. So all of that is to say we actually have it within our power to really utterly transform this moment historically. And the biggest thing that is standing in the way is that we don't believe we can do it. We have been so conditioned by the propaganda machines of Team Blue and Team Red that, oh, well, you have to vote for these two choices. Who says so? Like, when I'm thinking about this in Quranic terms, I'm often reminded of the magicians of Pharaoh, right? The magicians of Pharaoh keep the people spellbound with their staffs moving, and it's just prestidigitation. There is no real magic there. We are literally spellbound. They tell us over and over on the airwaves that there's only two teams and you have to pick one of them, and there's only so much you can do, and you can't actually do things like healthcare or housing or any of those things. Why? If you're not spending $1 trillion a year on the military budget, you can fix the roads. You can
Yeah.
invest in education. You can invest in mixed income social housing, not like the housing projects that I grew up in. There's actually more than enough, but we have to stop giving the best cut to the 1%. In the last 4 years, just since COVID, American billionaires have doubled their wealth while the rest of us become increasingly impoverished. What do we think is ahead of us if we continue to let these two corporate parties drive? They are going to own everything and everyone. It has to stop here.
Well, there, as far as policy is concerned, there's been attempts to put a wedge between
Yes.
African Americans
Oh, yes.
and Muslim Americans, suggesting that the genocide is not a common priority. I want you to speak to that. Is it true in your estimation? Is there a tug of war between Black communities and Muslim communities who feel different policies should be front and center? And what do you feel is the true intention behind that?
Yeah, again, I think that this is media trickery. And it's predicated on something that as a Black Muslim I can't accept. It's predicated on a fundamental divide between the Black community and the Muslim community, when I know that the Black Muslim community still remains the largest single ethnic contingent in the Muslim community,
Mhm.
and it is a significant minority inside every African American community. That's why in places like Philadelphia, you have massive presence of Black Muslims. In places like Michigan and Detroit, massive presence of Black Muslims. Likewise in Georgia. So when we say that Muslims have completely opted out of Team Blue, we're talking about a quarter of those Muslims are Black Muslims. So this is entirely a media projection. It is a display of propaganda, essentially from Team Blue, that is designed to create the impression that Black people are kind of standing with Kamala Harris. And certainly there have been celebrity endorsements and things of that nature. But when you actually have conversations with folks in the Black community, ain't no love for the Democrats like that. These are the people that are bought and paid for, will defend these positions. But when you start talking about common sense democratic reforms, and we especially like when you start talking about Dr. Jill's platform for reparations, for social housing, for not treating the drug epidemic in America through carcerality, but rather treat it as a public health problem, when you start to talk about Dr. Jill's immigration policy and essentially saying, listen, if you stop destabilizing Latin America and you decriminalize controlled substances, then you're not going to have cartel violence in Central America that's pushing people to flee. And not only that, but migrants don't commit crimes like the Team Blue and Team Red like to say. I mean, they're coming to America, the most violent country in the world. By definition, they're going to be less violent than the people that already live here. So immigrants almost never commit violent crimes. This is all fear mongering. When you actually start to reach out to Black and brown communities, especially with this message about how you can take the resources that are now being wasted on foreign imperialist wars, and you can make the world a safer place, less, chickens coming home to roost, less imperialist chickens coming home to roost, as Malcolm might have put it. And then you can put those resources to build communities here in the United States of America. Everybody likes that argument. In fact, I have not met anyone that does not like that argument. Even people that are already invested in Team Blue and Team Red. It's just that they have been persuaded that it can't happen. Everybody wants it. No one doesn't want it. And that's what these people are afraid of. They are afraid of getting an open hearing for the Green Party platform in front of the American public, because there's a lot that Dr. Jill could do right from day one with executive orders. Antitrust, for example, break up these corporate monopolies that are making it impossible for small businesses to thrive. Make the 1% pay their fair share. Cut taxes to small businesses. Cut personal income tax, so that we can bring back the middle class. Who doesn't want that?
Right.
Oh, it's that 1% of corporate interests that actually control both parties. They don't want that. Well, who cares what they think? Despite what Citizens United ruling might have decided, corporations ain't people. We do not have to take their opinion seriously.
as far as American Muslims finding themselves in a situation where we're in the
Oh,
belly of the
yes.
beast, supporting genocide through our tax dollars, and then trying to stop genocide with our protests and civic engagement.
Subhanallah.
I know this dichotomy is not anything new to the Black American
Not at
community.
all. Yeah, been there, done that. Go ahead.
So can you talk and I remember during the Black Lives movement, Muslims were very much a part of that
The younger
movement,
generation,
the
yes.
younger generation, Linda Sarsour and others. Can you talk a little bit about the Black liberation intertwined with Palestinian liberation?
Thank you for following up with this because it was present in your previous question and I sped past that part. So thank you for circling back. Again, Malcolm is my like first teacher. You know, Malcolm in his field notes actually made this explicit equation. He said that Israel was the Zionist movement is a white Ashkenazi movement, right? It's white Jews. It's not the majority of the world's Jews are people of color, but this European Ashkenazi population, so it's a white Jewish population being empowered by white imperialists, right? Balfour Declaration all the way through. To dispossess Arabs from their indigenous land. So Malcolm saw it as white supremacy. And by the way, this was also the position taken by Kwame Ture, James Baldwin in 1979, Open Letter to the Born Again, Angela Davis, Toni Morrison, every single black radical thinker that I respect always saw the Palestinian freedom struggle as an anti imperialist struggle against white supremacy. If you understand the Palestinian freedom struggle as an anti imperialist struggle against white supremacy, then you, as a black person, know exactly where to stand with respect to it. You stand with the Palestinians. And that's not just the case for those diaspora intellectuals that I mentioned, also people like Walter Rodney and others, you know, if you, to take the diaspora more broadly, Maurice Bishop in Guyana being another. But the African intellectuals, you know, Thomas Sankara, Nelson Mandela, you know, one after another of these African revolutionaries believed that standing with Palestinians in their resistance to white supremacist settler colonialism was a fundamental part of Black liberation. So, from my standpoint, if you understand Zionism as white supremacy, and by the way, I literally started the hashtag Zionism is white supremacy in 2021 with just a light bombing of Gaza, right? Light bombing compared to what's taking place now. I think this would have been May of 2021, right? um, I started that hashtag and started posting about how you understand Zionism as white supremacy because I think that this is an important part of the political education of our communities. If we understand what's taking place in Gaza and in the West Bank now increasingly as well, and you know the taking place since even before the Nakba, right? As white supremacy, then it actually tethers together like our struggles, like as you know, whether we're South Asian or Arab, you know, migrants that are dealing with the effects of colonialism and white supremacy as push factors that take send us to a place like the United States of America in the first place. Whether you know, my wife is Mexican American, like her mother was unable to see her brother for 23 years because she came here undocumented and was unable to go back to visit family. Well, that's a white supremacy problem. Like literally, Mexicans are indigenous to this hemisphere and they're kept out of their homeland by white settlers, right? If we understand white supremacy as actually the shared common enemy, then it brings together a bunch of anti colonial and anti imperialist struggles. Then this divide and conquer technique of trying to put a wedge between Palestinians and black folks, put a wedge between black folks and Latin folks, put a wedge between Latin folks and Asians. I mean, as a historian of Africa, I know divide and conquer when I see it. That's all it's designed to do is to weaken the prospects of our collective solidarity because our collective solidarity, especially when you have so many of these white kids nowadays just unplugging from white supremacy altogether, right? They just want to be part of freedom for everyone. And that's the reason why they're trying to ban TikTok. That's the reason why they're trying to keep these kids from voting, is that this generation is waking up in a way that previous generations have not. All we need to do is to organize all of that resistance. Last thing I'll say on this, Malcolm again, first teacher in many ways. I mean, my mom and my dad, but then like first political teacher. Let's put it that way. Malcolm said, "We are not outnumbered. We are out organized." Political parties do the work of organization that every single successful liberation movement needs. And in
Mhm.
point of fact, almost no liberation movements in the modern period are successful without a political party that serves as a vehicle for the organizing impetus of a broader movement. I am thoroughly convinced that the Green Party is well positioned to do exactly that, and it certainly will be. With Dr. Jill and myself at the top of the ticket, providing vision and communication and messaging and leadership that orients folks in that direction.
Well, I understand that the Green Party is people powered.
Yes.
You refuse to take any money from APAC or
Not just
any
a pack. We refuse to take money from a pack. Like we won't take
any
money
pack.
from any pack, right?
Okay, yeah.
So not just a pack, but any pack. No corporate contributions, no political action committees, no victory funds, no loopholes. The maximum that is allowed for an individual to contribute in the primary cycle is $3,300. In the general election cycle, $3,300. Elon Musk and person working in a factory and putting their money aside can contribute the exact same maximum amount, $3,300.
Do you feel like, though, that puts you at a disadvantage because the game is money?
It puts us at a tactical disadvantage, but it gives us a strategic advantage. So, at the level of day to day tactical fighting, it puts us at a disadvantage because they have more resources that they can throw at particular problems. But at the level of strategy, it gives a massive strategic advantage. We're the only party that isn't bought and paid for. And that is a huge strategic advantage. It allows you to develop policies that are in tune with the American people and what the American people want. And it keeps anyone from ever having purchasing power over the Green Party. My good friend Imam Dawood Walid, executive director of CARE Michigan, often likes to say, who funds you runs you. Well, the American people as a whole fund the Green Party. So
Mhm.
the American people run the Green Party. That is the only master to whom we are beholden. Not APAC, not Raytheon, not Lockheed Martin, not
Mhm.
Boeing,
Mhm.
right? And that is an incredible advantage if you are able to actually reach the people and crowdsource funding. So, I mean, you're dropping news here. I'll drop some additional news. Like we are dropping a launch good. What are we today? Saturday today, early part of next week. I think either Tuesday or Wednesday. The Prophet ﷺ like to start things on Wednesday. So it'll probably be Wednesday that we'll start the launch good to help, fundraise for the campaign. And it's absolutely crucial that people understand that, like, this is an investment that you are making in an incorruptible political organization, right? I can vouch for Dr. Jill's personal integrity myself, having, studied her, know people that know her for decades. And this Muslim community has seen me doing the work in this community for 20 plus years. If you put the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left, I would not sell out the people. And I can say the same for Dr. Jill. Well, that is a massive strategic advantage, even if it is a tactical disadvantage sometimes in the short term.
So, in the spring, the student encampments were materializing
Yep.
one after the other all across the US and actually internationally,
Hmm.
with Muslim, Black, Brown, Jewish students at
Yep.
the helm, followed by brutal crackdowns by their administration, calling on battalions of police. I myself witnessed battalions of police here at the local UCI campus. And now many students were charged, finding themselves with misdemeanors and felony charges and suspension from their schools. And now with the new school year, we're
Yep.
hearing more limitations on free
Yes.
speech. For instance, Cal State University Long Beach warned professors that they broke their policy when they used bullhorns and amplification devices. So,
That's so ludicrous, but sorry to interrupt.
no,
Continue. It is.
and so even in Michigan, they're being charged, people who were there last semester are being charged with trespassing. Being a professor
Yeah,
who I know you were part of these encampments
absolutely.
from the beginning, can you tell us a little bit about your experience? And also, what advice do you have to the Muslim youth and other students of conscience,
Yeah.
but informed by your activism
Yep.
and your study of history and change in America?
So this is an excellent question. And if I leave off the last part of it, bring me back to it, because I want to first go back a little bit to provide context. I am a historian. And the first thing that I would say is that the crisis in higher education that we are now witnessing is one, the seeds of it have been sown for 20 years now. So my first job was at Northwestern University, 2004, 2005. I think that I saw the last little bit of what was still a kind of free thinking um, education system. And what's taken place increasingly is the increasing corporatization of university cultures. And corporations don't negotiate, they command. They don't deal with dissent,
Mhm.
right, well at all. And there has been a fundamental kind of shift in higher education to where the donor class now essentially treats university scholars, intellectuals as the help. You are butlers and maids on your campuses. We are in charge. And many of the university presidents, I'm forgetting the Egyptian,
Rafik. Yeah.
who not really a
Um,
background in academia at all, background in the finance world, right? They're handpicking people that will execute their orders, and when those orders aren't executed, then the people are right, right.
mm,
They're taken out of positions. So again, who funds you runs you, or the kind of old school English saying, the one who pays the piper calls the tune.
mm,
So I've personally, and many of my colleagues have talked for decades now about how the donor class has become increasingly, intransigent and inflexible and sees itself as calling the shots in with respect to questions of higher education. So now you have this moment where so many of these donors are Zionists and they have so much power and influence on boards of regents and in other places. So, yeah, you're seeing an absolute, utter collapse of higher education. And the Ivy League specifically is falling over itself to see who can kowtow and bootlick to the Zionists better, right? Harvard, vying with Columbia, vying with the University of Pennsylvania to see who can embarrass themselves more in the way that they become utter sycophants to murderous thugs. Now, with respect to the encampments and to the resistance, on I think it was October 11th, I know it had not been a full week since the genocide started. I gave a talk at my local mosque in Santa Barbara, a few minutes from my personal home, on Black and Palestinian solidarity. And within 4 or 5 days of that talk, Zionists wrote an open letter to the university trying to get me fired, calling me a virulent
wow.
anti Semite, and all kinds of other ludicrous claims. On October 21st, 2 weeks after the genocide started, I organized a liberation march and concert. This is still at a time when people are having their heads down, they're afraid to talk, and I understood the moment, and I understood that this was going to be, and I said this at the time, that this was going to be the Vietnam War protest moment of this generation, and that we needed to finish what Vietnam protests didn't finish, didn't end the war machine, but that it applied so much pressure that even a right-wing reactionary thug like Richard Nixon was forced to withdraw from Vietnam. And I told the students that we absolutely have the power to bring about divestment. I saw it. I was marching for a free South Africa when I was 14 years old, and it happened. I knew that we could force, the US out of Gaza, and we still can because we forced, the United States out of Vietnam. We absolutely can apply that pressure. And that is precisely why the repression has been so brutal. That's precisely why the repression has been so brutal on campuses, because these people know that as the student generation goes, so goes the future. If these are people that are completely opting out of Zionism, and by the way, like I think it's now 60% of American Jews want a ceasefire.
Yes, it's a majority of
It's a
America.
majority of American Jews who have been, in many cases, like steeped in Zionist rhetoric for their whole lives. It's still a majority. It is an overwhelming majority of Americans. It's just that the democratic system, the anti-democratic system that we currently have, leaves no mechanism of popular redress of grievances. The elected officials are owned by AIPAC and the war machine. And so you see those same corporate interests, those same Israeli lobbying interests, those same Zionist interests trying to shape repressive environments on campus, not just sending police to beat kids up in riot gear, but as they did here at UCLA, standing off to the side and allowing modern day Irgun, modern day, Jewish thugs, the Zionist KKK to beat people up and the police wash their hands of it.
Mhm.
So again, fascism is not something that we have to fear happening down the line. It's been happening. And if we do not stand up, and Chris Hedges, amazing, award-winning journalist who's been run out of, mainstream media because of his anti-Zionist position, he pointed out, two things that I'll never forget. One was he said that we are Nero's guests. Nero fiddled as Rome burned, right? That's the famous saying. But a lot of people don't know that Nero would actually hold live crucifixions during dinner parties. He would have people covered in oil and lit aflame to provide the illumination for his dinner parties. True story. Now, Nero was a sociopath and a deranged monster, right? But who came to the dinner parties and was able to dine by the light of human beings being burned alive? And Chris Hedges says we are Nero's guests. We are the ones that are watching human beings burned alive and incinerated, and we continue to party. The Democratic National Convention was a perfect example of this. And then the other thing that he said that I'll never forget is that he said, what is being done to Gaza now is coming soon to a neighborhood near you. That's why they're building all of these cop cities. That's why they are trying to normalize repression of basic functions of nonviolent resistance. In the end, we will all be Palestinians. In the end, whenever we resist, they will simply liquidate us. And if you teach them that they can carry out wholesale slaughter in full view of the world and you won't do anything about it, just wait till it's your turn.
There's definitely inextricable link between what happens overseas to what happens over here in at home.
Yeah.
What I also wanted to ask you on a brighter note is Dr. Jill Stein,
Yes.
a white Jewish woman,
Yes.
and yourself,
Yes.
a black Muslim,
Very black and very Muslim. Yes.
on the same ticket.
Yes.
Is this the Green Party's message of what the future of America could be?
Absolutely. Right. Don't talk about it, be about it. Don't tell them about it, show them. Right. And this is like the beauty of this ticket is, we're from different generations, we're from different backgrounds, we share values. And I'll just let you in on something that I told Dr. Jill, and I think that I mentioned this before, that I told her that Moses and Aaron set the people free with so much less than what we have at our backs. What the Green Party actually has access to is a nationwide, network that, yes, it's been, beaten down by Democratic lawsuits and all kinds of other things, but it is still a nationwide party, the third largest party in the United States of America, capable of voters in 95% of the country will be able to vote for us in this upcoming election. And yes, we're modeling that, like, you can come from different backgrounds, you can come from different places and times, but if you share like a value of restoring democracy to the people, of not engaging in pointless culture wars that don't have anything to do with anything, and you're actually focused on like intelligent, practical solutions for the American people, then you absolutely can work together. And I think that one thing that I've learned in these past 3+ weeks is that Dr. Jill and I make a heck of a 1-2 punch. I mean, we make a heck of a 1-2 punch. It's awfully difficult, for people that would try to attack this ticket to land a punch, like how are you going to triangulate an attack against a white Jewish anti-Zionist and a black Muslim scholar? That's a series of tough angles. It's a tough nut to crack. And I'll just say this as a personal matter, like I've learned so much from Dr. Jill just in these last 3 weeks in terms of like, policy and the way that the Green Party has evolved responses to these questions, right? Bringing reparations into the public discussion as early as 2010, Green New Deal. And it's worth mentioning that like all of the policies that everybody likes from the Democrats that they never actually deliver on, they took all of those from the Green Party in the first place. Student debt relief, Green Party, Green New Deal, literally Green New Deal because the Green Party came up with it. All of the progressive policies that people think that they like that could come from the Democrats, we wrote them, they stole them, then they said that they would do them and didn't do them. So I think that absolutely, this ticket is capable of like delivering on a series of promises that Team Blue has failed to live up to. And the last thing that I'll say with this is that I think that Dr. Jill and I can also make a big appeal, not just to those Bernie Trump voters. I think that's obvious that we're going to make a big appeal to those Bernie Trump voters and to people that supported Bernie's movement, more broadly. But I'll be blunt. I think that I'll just say from my personal experience, talking to neighbors, strangers in my community in Santa Barbara, which is, a little more well-to-do than a number of communities. It's much more kind of red leaning than much of the state of California. What I've found in speaking with neighbors is that quite literally, when I tell them, hey, what if we could cut your small business taxes and your personal income taxes, and all we have to do it is to stop taking your tax money, handing it to Raytheon after laundering it through a genocide. Everybody loves that.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, so because unlike what the media likes to portray, particularly MSNBC and the blue controlled media, believe it or not, most Trump voters are not rabid racists. They're not. Most Trump voters put up with the rabid racism because they don't see Team Blue as being any better and because they want lower personal income and small business
It's a
taxes.
rational decision.
Exactly. It's a transactional decision, and they have not been persuaded that there is any fundamental moral difference between Team Blue and Team Red, because in point of fact, there isn't. I'm not going to talk to those people on a basis of condescension, assuming that they're racist. Yes, I understand that there are groups of white supremacists that side with Trump for their own reasons. Yes, I believe that Trump is himself personally a racist and a white supremacist, but I also don't think that every Trump voter is personally committed to those ideas. Certainly not the Black and Latin communities, which are drawn to the Republican Party. I think that if we make a simple common sense, pitch, that a lot of people will respond. And then the last thing, I guess, about that composition of the ticket, and this is something that I think is going to take some political education for people, because I think that they're used to thinking about Team Blue being on the left and Team Red being on the right. Okay, and then they've been taught that Team Green is way to the left, even of Team Blue. So then they think we're kind of like an extreme left position, but that's not how to think about it. The way that I understand it is that Teams Blue and Red are both on the extreme right. And you now see this with Kamala Harris's cabinet, and she's talking about giving away positions to Republicans. You have all of these, murderous thugs that were responsible for the Iraq war.
Dick Cheney
I mean,
yeah,
like
his
it's
endorsement.
I'm trying to find the words for it, because like what do you call it when one war criminal brings another war criminal onto the team, right? They're like putting it together, a dream team of war criminals. This is like the 1992 Olympics of war criminals. They've got Michael Jordan and Charles Barkley and Magic Johnson all on the same team. That's a great one. Let's print that. But seriously, so they're stacking up and by the way, Kamala Harris throughout her career has consistently been more right wing in her positions than Donald Trump. Trump was a Democrat for much of his career. So if you watch, and believe me, I couldn't watch that ridiculous debate the other night, you're essentially seeing messaging that is designed to hit this kind of culture war chamber that pretends that there's a discussion between the left and the right. There is no difference.
I mean, when they were competing, who loves Israel more?
I love Israel more. I'm going to bomb more kids. No, I'm going to bomb more kids. Right? I mean, that's where we are. And the reason is that they are so far to the right, you can barely see them over there. I really think that when people get introduced to the Green Party and start to realize that it's about actually having power come from the grassroots up and empowering local decision making in communities, it means that the Green Party is not going to look the same in specific communities, because it's designed to fulfill the needs of specific local communities and to have an open ecumenical access to politics for everybody, and that the goal of Green Party elected officials is to be public servants rather than politicians. I think when people hear the message right, they're going to realize that the Green Party's in the middle, it's in the center, and that you've got two parties of the far right that pretend like they're having a fight between right and left, when all that's really happening is that you have competition between two different factions within the 1%. Whether you vote team blue or team red, militarized fascism wins, because they're both owned by APAC and the war machine. They just have different patrons. The Christian evangelicals have patronage networks on the right, and certain social constituencies have patronage networks on the so-called left. But they're all corporate. They're all murderous. None of them actually respond to the American people. It does not make sense to talk about them in terms of right and left.
Your points are well taken. And finally, I wanted to ask you, as a Muslim,
Mm.
what is your guiding light, ayah or hadith, that you find strength from during this highly charged political season of your own life running as a presidential candidate,
This is such a
vice president?
beautiful question. So, for the longest time, I thought we were in Surah Taha, and I thought that this was going to be the story of an exodus. But now I think we're in Surah Yusuf. I think that we are in a story where this community finally gets its space on the throne. I think that this is the
So,
time when the Muslims finally have an opportunity to be empowered and to move in the space, not as sycophants, or rather supplicants, I should say. Some sycophants, yes, but supplicants. We're going with our hands out, hoping. I think that this is the time when we get, as Yusuf was, established in the earth. And I think that Surah Yusuf is how I'm reading much of what's taking place in my own life personally now. As a child that grew up in extreme difficulty, hardship, poverty, faced some of the worst of what America has to offer, and then was minding my own business, trying to live right, and was suddenly, put into a position where if I get my ego out of the way, and carry out the jihad and nafs like my teachers have taught me to, then I should be able to help this community establish itself in the corridors of power in ways that serve not just this community, but every community. With you, I gave you a surah, you asked for ayahs, so I'm going to give you two ayahs. And this is probably the best way to end the interview. I find it just not coincidental. I find it, what's the word? Providential. I find that it is the divine hand that has guided us to this moment, that these two ayahs would be in God's book. One, is there any sound worse than the braying of a jackass, than the braying of a donkey? Now, do you know of a political party that represents itself with a donkey? And what is God talking about in this ayah? He's talking about the liars and the deceivers, what we would talk about today as gaslighters. Well, do you know any sound than worse than the braying of the Democratic Party, that swear that they're there for the people, but all they do is lie and gaslight you and make a bunch of noise, just braying like donkeys? That's all I hear. Okay, so that's one ayah. And the other one, and have you seen how your Lord dealt with the party of the elephant? Those verses are not in God's book by accident.
yeah, I didn't know the Democrats or Republicans are in the Quran.
They're Democrats and the Republicans are in the Quran. They chose their totems not knowing what they were choosing. And what did God say about the party of the elephants? That it would be the birds that would follow the party of the elephant. We don't look like we're many in number, but when we move as one in a flock, we will take down the party of the elephant. There's no sound worse than the braying of an ass. And now, lastly, I'll say that this is the Green Dome Green Party, right? That this is the Khidr party now. This is the party that we have this opportunity to infuse Islamic ethics and values in a universal way. and write those into the future of American history. I'll just say now that, now I would not have chosen this life for myself. Everybody that knows me for the last 20 years of teaching in public knows that I've never talked about running for elected office, furthest thing from my mind. I've been writing and researching about how West African Muslim scholars who were teaching and writing and teaching their students, nonetheless, I've been writing about how they ended up getting pulled into the fundamental social struggles of their time, right? In the 1500s and 1600s, Muslim scholars ended up organizing the resistance to the rise of the Atlantic slave trade. In the 1770s and 1780s in Senegal and Nigeria, Muslim scholars ended up leaving aside their books and their teaching to go literally abolish the institution of slavery in northern Nigeria and also in the Senegal River Valley, the slave trade in northern Nigeria and slavery itself in the Senegal River Valley. I didn't realize that by studying and writing about this history that I was about to be written into it, right? That I would be called upon to leave aside, for a time my books and my teaching and my writing and to fight against the face of the same evils in my time. And it's what I sometimes refer to as the divine bait and switch. You will be preparing for one thing that you know and that you see and that you want, right? But you are only preparing on the basis of what you know. You can only want that which you know. But God is preparing you for something completely different. It just requires all the same things that you were preparing for through your own initiative. And this is, part of God's sunnah, because he wants believers to know that the victory comes from him, not through their preparation, but that the preparation is necessary to bring the victory to fruition. Trust in God, but tie your camel. Prepare, to be of service. And then if God calls upon you, then give it your best. So now that I've been tagged into this fight, I'm not backing out of it. I mean, I fully intend to, if we don't land that knockout punch like Ali did and we don't win the White House, I'm going to run in an off-year election, whether it's for a congressional seat or whether it's for, governor, right?
We heard it here.
Yeah, exactly. Would love to tell Gavin Newsom all about himself here in the state of California, or for a congressional seat, because I do not want to let the Muslims off the hook. I want them to understand that this is not an episodic intervention into American politics. This is the beginning of us building power in concert with a bunch of other freedom-minded communities around this country, that we can both teach and that we can also learn from.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Ware. And we pray for your success and the success of the Palestinians in Gaza
I mean, may God give us liberation.
and for liberation and freedom for all the oppressed.
I mean, Allahumma ameen.
Jazakumullah khair.
From your lips to God's ears,
Ameen.
sister.